Well, welcome everybody. We're excited to have you all on. We have, looks like a lot of people tuning in from all over California.
Yeah, I recognize many of those places, man. It's nice to be reconnected with California. Very nice, very nice. So we got a social worker, we got Jenny Cortez. Awesome. Jennifer Wayman. All right. I see some names I recognize. All right. Brianna Beam, Amy Self, Jeff Hill. Thank you
I'm
everybody
gonna
for
check,
being here. I
I'm
know
gonna
you
check one
guys.
more thing here before we start. Let me try one more thing, see if I can solve
Okay.
this. But
All right.
uh, um,
Don't worry, we're resilient. We can
we're
adapt.
we're
We're a
this
resilient
isn't our
company.
first rodeo, but
Yeah.
we always have one or two tech issues, it seems like every time.
Some.
All right. I think we're good. I will just share my full screen. Well, welcome everybody. My name's Hans Magleby. I am the president and founder of WhyTry. I'm here with my good buddy Christian Moore. We're excited to be with you today and share with you a little bit about how WhyTry, the WhyTry program, and the WhyTry approach can help address chronic absenteeism that we're seeing. I know extensively in California, it's a big problem, but we're seeing it all over the country. I was just in Des Moines, Iowa last week doing some training and working in the school district there. They have a 34%, or sorry, 43% chronic absenteeism rate in their district. And I was training a bunch of attendance specialists essentially that are working directly with kids trying to address just some of the root issues and challenges related to that. So we're excited to kind of share some things today about our approach and some of the things that we feel can be a great resource in addressing some of the attendance struggles that we're seeing in our students right now. Let me just introduce Christian. I'm going to start off with Christian. Christian is um, my old friend. We go back a long time. In fact, let me just say here, Christian is a licensed clinical social worker. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to hear Christian speak before, he is the author of The Resilience Breakthrough, our best-selling book, and really kind of an amazing resource when it comes to resilience. We're going to share more of that with you at the end today. But he's a sought-after speaker. I don't know how many keynotes he's done at pretty much every large education conference you can think of. He's probably been a keynote there at some point over the last 20 years. And Christian is just one of the greatest advocates for youth that I know. He, as a social worker, is always helping and supporting people. And our relationship goes back to our high school days. In fact, Christian's gonna laugh. I just pulled out a picture here. Um,
Holy cow. Wow, you have to send me that one. That's too funny. Dang, I
I
was
just
good
found
looking
this
at
last
that
night.
age,
I was
huh?
digging through some stuff and found this picture last night. So this is us a long time ago, back in our high school days, driving in my old Suzuki Samurai. So cruising town. Christian, I'm going to have him share a little bit of his background because most of what we do with WhyTry comes from Christian's background and his story. And so, Christian, why don't you go ahead and kind of introduce to them
Yeah.
a little bit about your background and how that relates to how WhyTry was created?
Yeah, I grew up during the 70s and 80s, outside of Baltimore. Everybody out there knows, I'm sure there's different challenges in Baltimore. That probably is what got me interested in being a social worker, doing the work I'm doing right now. Both my parents had some pretty intense mental health issues. My mom had social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, had a fear of leaving the house. My dad was a code breaker at NSA. He's autistic. I'll show a quick little video clip in a second. But yeah, I struggled with learning disabilities, had some behavioral issues growing up. There was some school years I missed many, many days of school. So I'm very, I'm a big supporter of what SARB does, who you guys are, because I was one of those students myself. So I really do get it. And I got interested because of my own journey, my own life experience. I got interested in the resilience in the need for resilience. I wrote this book, The Resilience Breakthrough, and it was unique about the book. It's the only book that shows you where resilience comes from internally. Like Hans says, we'll share more with you at another time when we have a little bit more time. But please, yeah, if you haven't read that book or seen that, I promise you won't waste your time. In college, I focused my graduate thesis on the impact that learning disabilities has on poverty and crime. I learned that over 70% of youth in our youth correction system have learning differences. Over 80% of the adult prison population has a learning difference. Now, there's many reasons why someone's incarcerated besides a learning disability. It just happens to be, like a pie. One slice of that pie is a learning disability. It could be poverty, it could be mental health issues, it can be all kinds of things, past abuses, trauma. But so I just became very interested in where resilience comes from internally. Hans, you want to hit that next slide?
Yeah.
I think I'm sure many of you are familiar with this 20-year Quai longitudinal study. They wanted to know, two kids grew up in the same home, same neighborhood, same background. One kid makes it out, the other kid doesn't make it. What's the X factor? And I saw this in my own family. Some of my older siblings spent time being incarcerated, and I've been able to be a commencement speaker at Johns Hopkins. I've been able to speak at a White House convening. We grew up in the same home, same background. What is that X factor? And so that got my interest. And again, the key we saw was resilience. For years I told my life story, and one day someone said to me, Christian, it would probably be healthier if you didn't tell your trauma over and over and over again. Hans was saying, been on the road, actually been on the road about 26 years speaking. I've gone millions and millions of miles speaking, and so we created a video clip that we're going to play for you right now that will quickly just show you a little more in depth of my background, and then we'll jump into some really important tools for you. But again, I want to thank you guys for taking the time. I see we were seeing in the chat window who you guys are. You guys all are extremely busy, and I promise you the next 45 minutes or so will be key, will be really important to reach students with my background. Let's go ahead and play that one. I grew up in between Baltimore and DC.
You hear that okay?
And a family of 12 kids, 5 brothers, 6 sisters. Both my parents had some mental health challenges. My mom had social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, had a fear of leaving the house. You have to leave the house to go get food. So there wasn't a lot of food to eat sometimes in my house growing up. Don't tell anyone, but my dad was one of the highest level code breakers at the National Security Agency. You could give my dad any mathematical problem and he could instantly rattle it off the top of his head. My dad was autistic. He was a genius, but he had very little common sense or social skills. If you've ever seen that movie, A Beautiful Mind, you've met my dad. So having 2 parents with some mental health challenges put me in a situation where I ended up being a street kid. I could hang out till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning on a school night, had very few rules, very few boundaries. One night, I was out late at night and a car pulls up and I hear a voice, and the voice I hear is the voice of a woman who I endearingly call Mama Jackson. It was one of my best friend's moms who sees me out there, late at night.
Christian had so many obstacles that was going on in his home.
She knows what I'm out there doing, and she says, look, don't you ever set foot on our property. I'm gonna call the school tomorrow. I'm gonna make sure you're not in any of Sean's classes. I remember thinking to myself, dang, I know I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. I can never go to school with him ever again.
When you see a child that's hungry, there's no happiness there. You're thinking about what other kids have that they don't have, okay? But when you see a child that's hungry and you give that child some food, you see that child's disposition change.
Going to school was very difficult for me as a child that was diagnosed with ADHD, conduct disorder, and severe learning disabilities. When I was sitting in a classroom, oftentimes, I was embarrassed. When I got called out loud, I would act up and get in trouble instead of embarrassing myself because I didn't know how to read or didn't know how to do basic math. So, for me, it was like going to the doctor's office every day, going to school. I had a hard time telling time. When I was even 17 years old, I couldn't tell time on a hand clock. To me, 4:45 equals 25 minutes to 5, but they tell me a quarter's 15. But how could a quarter not equal 25?
When we concentrate on that more to make sure that a child's needs are provided for, then that child will thrive. I know that I'm loved, and I know that this person is going to feed me to make sure I have what I need. One of his teachers in high school said to him that he would never go to college. Christian went to college.
Growing up in between DC and Baltimore, I saw many social problems in my community, in my neighborhood. I saw poverty, I saw hopelessness at times. I even saw some violence. But I remember walking to school one morning and literally seeing one of my best friends evicted from his house. His furniture was all throughout his front yard. I could see the heartbreak in his eyes, his parents' eyes. And I knew in that moment, I wanted to be a social worker. And I knew I could not become a social worker unless I went to college. But I was told college was probably not going to be an option for me with a 6th grade math level, a 7th grade reading and writing level. Statistically, I had a better chance of playing the NBA and becoming LeBron James.
His experience was at the other side of the track. Life was different. Life was unique. And the kids like that, they have to survive.
I struggled getting through college math. College math is a requirement to make it through school. I remember that feeling in my stomach when I knew I couldn't graduate.
They're not going to let me graduate because I can't do math. I can't count money, I can't numbers, I get confused and all of these things. He was like a bobcat in a cage.
So I came up with something called the No F game plan. And this was a strategy that I used to make it through school with my learning differences.
He made himself big. He made himself known to others. I'm here. Hey, I may not have what you have, but I have a street smart.
I would go to every class. I would sit on the front row. I would do all the homework assignments. And I would do enough extra credit to get a D-. I would shoot for A's, but I learned in college you get just as much credit with a D-.
And his paper is not polished. Other students get an A. Christian gets B, sometimes a C. But he has ideas. He has a substance. And the WhyTry program that he ran with and helped incredible number of students and the teachers and administrators came out of a classwork.
He created an environment to teach teachers how to really deal with students that may have significant functional limitations.
I persevered. Luckily, I knew what resilience was. I knew how to take my academic challenges and use them as a reason to knock down barriers, to focus on what was right with me, not what was wrong with me.
The vision of WhyTry, and I think this thing is called the roller coaster ride. And I'm so glad that when he fell off of that roller coaster, that he got back on.
Dr. Virgil Wood, civil rights icon and close friend to Dr. Martin Luther King, learned about WhyTry's impact and decided to honor Mama Jackson with the National Rosa Parks Save the Children Award. Mama Jackson gave me a safe and loving environment so I could thrive. She didn't get rid of my problems at home, at school, in my neighborhood. She showed me how to use those problems as a fuel source to put one foot in front of another and create a productive outcome with the opposition. Despite my many challenges, I was able to get a master's degree with a 6th grade math level and a 7th grade reading and writing level, and become a licensed clinical social worker. As a school social worker, I quickly noticed it was very difficult to engage students like myself, especially students coming to school with no paper, no pencil, no notebook, totally disengaged from the academic process. I noticed doing verbal cognitive intervention didn't reach many of these students. One day my colleague pointed out to me that most of the students I'm working with are visual learners, not auditory learners. So I thought to myself, wait a minute, I'm an artist. Why would I not take everything and make it visual for the student? Most of these kids are visual learners. So I decided to take evidence-based mental health practice and deliver it in visual metaphors. And I noticed once I did it in a visual metaphor, the student locked in on the visual picture. It kept them engaged. They were far more interested in what I was doing. I knew I had the student in that moment. Using visual metaphors to teach things like your decisions have consequences, how to tear off your labels, how to understand your emotions and the emotions of others. And what was really exciting to me is sometimes 2 or 3 weeks later, they could remember the details of what we did a few weeks before in counseling. And that's when I knew we had that engagement. Then we decided to reinforce the picture with music and physical activities to increase that engagement even more. We took brief solution-focused therapy, reality therapy, strength-based counseling, and combined it into a learning method that any educator or counselor could use to reach students, especially students that are having a hard time answering the question, why try?
All right, well, you can see that professor right there, Dr. Mike Seipel, had a huge impact on my life. He's the one that said, look, Christian, in your internship, really try to, take what you went through and walk kids through it. He went to Cornell University, was one of the leading experts, he still is, one of the leading experts in poverty in the country. And he realized, hey, I might be able to do some things as far as innovating in how we're relevant. Hans is going to talk a little bit more about relevancy in a few minutes, but relevancy is a big part of what we do in WhyTry. I want to hit that next one's there. And speaking about relevancy, again, until the intervention is relevant to the child or the child connects with it, I knew I wasn't going to get that far with them. So that's when you started seeing me taking everything in mental health and hand drawing it. I would draw that picture. One of the first ones I drew was a roller coaster, just showing the ups and downs of life. And at the end of the hour, I'd say to the student, what does this picture teach? And they would say, well, those are my uphill challenges. The crash, this is what's causing me to crash. These are the things that are happening in the crash. The loop represents the problems they keep doing over and over. And then literally, sometimes even a month later, I'd say, what is that picture? They could tell me what that picture was. The first couple of years I was a therapist, I say, what do we do today? The kid would tell me whatever I wanted to hear to get the heck out of my office as fast as they could. But by putting it in a visual picture, it kept that engagement, and most important, it kept recall. And one of my favorite things is when students say to me, Christian, when I was willing to change, when I was ready to change, all I could see is your visual picture. I've heard that hundreds of times. Sometimes in the moment they're not motivated, but when they're ready to change, they'll remember that, hey, I'm not these labels and so on here. Let me just hit the next slide here. So again, the first one is that reality ride, just helping kids understand their decisions have consequences. You heard Mama Jackson referring to that one. And the name of WhyTry, the reason why we have that name is because when I first asked students, what's the answer to the question why try? They go, I don't know, Mr. Moore. They just shrug their shoulders. And my goal is if they try in life, they'll have more opportunity, freedom, self-respect. If they get on that other track, if they can get out of that loop and get on that other track, they can access opportunity, freedom, self-respect. And then the rest of the program is to show them how to get on that track right there. To get on that track, we want them to tear off their labels. Often when I first work with students, they have all these labels right here: failure, druggie, learning disabled, dumb, lazy, rebellious, attitude, truant, runaway, angry, a bad example, ungovernable. They have all these gang members, they have all these different labels. And the goal here is the partnership with them and helping them tear off their labels. The next one, well, by the way, this one I just want to emphasize, and you'll see this, we're only with you a short amount of time, but I just want to emphasize that we have 10 units and there's very comprehensive lesson plans that go with these units. And Hans will talk about it in a minute a little bit more, but I just want to highlight, we have these visual metaphors, and me and Hans are both artists. We both have background in art, and that's kind of, we combined my background in mental health, Hans's background, he graduated from college in art, and bringing those worlds together. So again, we have visual metaphors, we have activities. Again, we try to have as many body kinesthetic physical activities as possible. And when I learned about all the different learning styles the kids have, I said, man, 90% of my college education was just doing verbal cognitive talk intervention with these kids. And then we have tons of stories, videos, art, music. I'll say, draw me a picture of what life is like when you're in that loop. Draw me a picture of what life would be like when you got out of that loop. Draw me a picture of what the world would look like, or create a collage. If you're accessing opportunity, freedom, self-respect, what would that look like? So we use as much of the arts as we possibly can to reinforce these pictures. And a lot of that, just me and Hans have mental health backgrounds and we're artists. When I was in school, I had to learn how to control my defense mechanisms. The teacher would say, Christian, turn to page 130 and read out loud. I didn't know how to read, so I'd say F you to the teacher, or punch the kid next to me, because I'd much rather be sent to the principal's office for acting out behaviorally. Today I realize, why was I doing that? It's because I had no control over my defense mechanisms. The next picture here, I look at life's problems being like water. We have to drink enough water to stay alive, but we've seen this even last week here in America. Too much water can cause death, flooding. So we take that challenge, whatever the challenge they're having, we put it through these 4 dams. The first dam is, we want them to focus their self-talk on what they have control over. We want them to tap into character and heart. That just means you go through the motions, you don't give up, out of respect for other people that you care about and care about you. We want them, that third dam, to tap into a passion, purpose, or interest. And then we want them to get plugged into a support system. The next one is a tribute to my home state of Maryland. If you put a bunch of live crabs in a pot, if you don't put a lid on the pot, why can't the crabs get out of the pot? Because other crabs are reaching up and pulling them down. So I'll say, hey, your friends you're skipping school with, you're doing drugs with, you're being truant with, you're fighting with, all they're doing is they're pulling you down. They're keeping you in the pot. Misery loves company. And again, we put over 3 million students, K through 12th grade, through these visual metaphors. We've never had a child go, I don't get these pictures. Being someone with severe learning disabilities, I hate complexity. We want to make sure it's relevant. And one of the things me and Hans, I've gone millions of miles. We know programs come into a school system and then sit on a bookcase, and they bring another program in. And this is really Hans. I'm kind of quoting Hans here. Hans was like, there's no way, Christian, we're going to make this type of sacrifice, do all this traveling for a program to sit on a bookcase. So Hans wanted to make sure that it was so user friendly that the teacher would grab this program over whatever other program they had. And that's kind of one of our niches, is it's very relevant to the students. The next picture here is a simple problem solving model. We have them write in the problem and the hurdle, and then we just walk them through the kind of simple social work problem solving model. They have to identify the problem, create options, get help, take action, believe that change is even possible. And then number 6, jump back up. Then the next one, they've got to apply hard work, desire, time, and effort. The other day I was speaking to 2,000 kids. I said, what would take you further in life, hard work or being smart? The 2,000 kids are like, being smart, Mr. Moore, being smart. I spent the next hour teaching them, actually, in America, hard work will take you much further than just academic experience. I tell the kids, you have both. You're smart and you're hardworking. But being someone with severe learning disabilities, I had to work a lot of hours to have opportunity in life, to have freedom, to have self-respect. The next metaphor here, they have to live society's laws and rules. The balloon represents the things they've given up on. It could be skipping school, doing drugs, stealing, fighting, run away. There's no resistance from that balloon. But as they lift that weight, it tears the fibers, it tears the cells in the muscle. And the muscle keeps getting bigger and bigger, stronger and stronger. I got to tell you all my favorite joke. I do 3,000 sit-ups every morning. So it makes my stomach muscle stronger and stronger. Hans hates that joke, by the way. But just kidding. All right, the next metaphor here.
Next.
They got to get plugged into a support system. When I first work with students, they often have one or less of these. And one of the good things that has come out of COVID is we know now human beings are social creatures. It's not just coming from a bleeding heart social worker saying, you know, relationships is the X factor. We know that for sure now with this worldwide study, what happened when we put people in isolation. So we just want kids to get tapped into a parent or caregiver, a positive friend, a teacher, counselor, school official, a positive mentor, or something that inspires and motivates them to do good. And again, we have elaborate lesson plans that walk them exactly through how to do that. Then the last one here kind of sums it up. When I first work with students, they're often standing next to that wall right there. They're dealing with, you know, could be truancy, failure, drugs, anger, fighting, who cares, different family, academic problems. But our goal is they learn how to stop, crash, and tear off their labels and so on. They can get on top of that wall and see opportunity, freedom, and self-respect. And to be really frank with you guys, how we've gotten into over 30,000 school systems, we just say, hey, look at the students' GPA and test scores before they go through these skills and their GPA and test scores after they go through these skills. Once the school system sees how it impacts those two things, they'll usually expand it. And that's how we've reached over 3 million students is we found a very simple way to deliver evidence-based mental health in a way that's relevant to students. And Hans created most of that. I'm going to turn it over to him. Let me just introduce Hans. Hans's work has impacted millions and millions of children have stayed in school, have graduated because of Hans Magleby. He's the real deal. I always like to joke around and say I'm the hot air, but Hans takes all my theories and puts them where the rubber hits the road. He's the real deal. So here is the great Hans Magleby. Again, he's reached so many kids. He's never going to tell
All
me
right,
that.
stop.
All right.
Good
There's
enough.
Hans. Here he is.
Uh, thanks, Christian. You know, um, like Christian mentioned, you know, I have a degree in art. I was the art director for a video game company. I've kind of had a lot of years experience in technology. I was a tech entrepreneur, started a technology company, kind of built that and sold that, and then started WhyTry with Christian, just kind of as a hobby initially. But we both just had this passion for taking, you know, what we understand that is really effective at engaging kids using technology, using visual arts, using the use of story and creating, you know, all these different resources. And, you know, I saw Christian doing this as he was working with kids using these metaphors just as a therapist. Have a brother-in-law, his name's Bruce, who works with us, and he was a school counselor, was kind of one of the first outside of Christian's internship to be using WhyTry in a school setting. And he helped us add a lot of the experiential components and activities that go along with what we have. And we had another guy come along and help us add some musical resources that go along with it. And we're just trying to deliver things to kids in a way that is following what we understand as the best practices for student engagement. And that's really, I think, my passion, my expertise is being able to observe somebody like Christian or Bruce or other just amazing educators and people that we've worked with that have contributed to what we have and helped develop the tools as they are today. And just try and organize them and put them in a model that anybody can take and use. And so, because we love to use visual metaphors, I thought, you know, talking about chronic absenteeism, WhyTry isn't just a toolkit. It's this huge toolkit with all these resources, and then we have tons of lessons for different applications of the toolkit that people can use. We go from pre-K all the way up through 12th grade, and even in higher education, it's used to help students transitioning from high school into college and having a successful college experience. We have uh, a bunch of things that are going on in mental health and in youth corrections and even adult corrections. You know, we have inmates in prisons and jails that go through the WhyTry program. We've had inmates on death row that go through the WhyTry program. We've often kind of joked that we're the only K through death row program in the country because it's a really
You stole
broad
my
range
joke. He stole
application of
that
what
from
we
me.
do.
All right.
Yeah. Play pen to the state pen. Is that what you're gonna say?
Yeah, there you go.
So, you know, I wanted to just kind of talk about chronic absenteeism as it kind of relates, using the wall as a metaphor that kind of connects to sort of the overall approach that we have with WhyTry. You know, when we're dealing with students that are struggling with chronic absenteeism, that's often a sign that they're feeling disconnected. You know, they're unmotivated, they're unable to see the value of school. Students standing at the base of the wall are blocked by obstacles. They have peer pressure, hopelessness, anxiety, truancy, substance use, struggles at home, depression, failure. They may be homeless. You know, any of the things that are happening at home, with their friends, and even in school. And when it, you know, so this student kind of represents a lot of the students that you're probably working with there in California, or I think we have a few people from other states that are tuning in with us today. And when a kid is in that position, it's really difficult to answer the question, why try? They have this limited view and there's no hope. They're feeling disengaged, and that's leading to chronic absenteeism. And so for us, when students feel, you know, the first step in helping students move forward is relationships. And when students feel seen, supported, and valued, they find motivation to start engaging with school and start engaging with the things that we're trying to help them see. In WhyTry, we have this concept that we call surrendering the one-up relationship that is kind of at the heart of the WhyTry approach. And it's an approach to help educators build trust and create a school environment where students want to show up and participate. And so then, you know, our goal is to try and take those students, instead of being in front of that wall where they have that limited view and they're struggling, it's very difficult to have hope in that situation, help them see the steps that they need to take to be able to get up on top of the wall, to change their position. You know, as students climb the steps of the wall, they develop the skills of resilience that help them to see the relevance of school. And so these are kind of what Christian was just taking you through, each of these key concepts from the metaphors that we're using here. And we have different metaphors to deliver these same concepts to younger kids. So down into elementary and all the way down to pre-K, we teach the same principles, but we have multiple metaphors that we use. So the reality ride is about improved decision-making. Tearing off labels is focusing on positive self-image and understanding the impact that your labels are having, and helping kids realize they can tear those off, that they have control, they can change the way people see them. Emotional regulation, peer influence in relationships, problem-solving skills, hard work and determination, responsibility and expectations, support systems and relationship building, getting plugged in. And then if you could imagine a railing there again, like Christian was saying, that would represent the motivation formula. And that's kind of having a resilient mindset. You know, I remember when we created the motivation formula, I was talking to Christian one day and he was saying to me, it's so frustrating. I'm working with these kids. You know, this was as a social worker, just in a community mental health setting. We went to lunch and he was just venting to me that I have all these kids I'm working with. And I feel like we make progress and then they go home. And it's like all that progress goes out the window. And he's like, I can't get rid of their problems. And I said, well, I'm not a social worker, but I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to get rid of their problems. And he goes, I know, it's just hard. You know, I want to help them more, but we're struggling with that. And we kind of came up with this whole metaphor, kind of addressing that, called the motivation formula, where we're talking about what can we do? Well, we can't get rid of their problems, but how can we help them see their problem as a resource, that it becomes fuel or something that they can channel. And so ultimately, all of those steps are what are helping them see the why of school, helping them see the relevance of school. And that's getting them up to where they're in this position on top of the wall. You know, each step, overcoming setbacks, building self-awareness, making intentional choices, equips them to handle challenges. And when they reach the top, it doesn't mean their struggles disappear, but it gives them a broader perspective and helps them stay focused and keep moving forward despite the obstacles. You know, for us, we always talk about resilience isn't an achievement, it's a continuous process of growth and adaptation. And that is the position of resilience, being there on top of the wall. By fostering those strong relationships, making learning relevant, and reinforcing resilience as a lifelong skill, we're providing a framework to address chronic absenteeism and help students stay engaged in their education. And so our goal is looking at, you know, WhyTry as a resource that can help address some of those issues. And coming back to those 3 R's, they're really kind of at the heart of our WhyTry approach. The relationship component that we develop is so important. Obviously, I think we all understand and hear constantly the importance of relationships. You know, I saw this quote in Education Week last year, and it said, a review of educational research analysis of 46 studies found that strong teacher-student relationships are linked both in the short and long term to improvements across nearly every metric schools value. So essentially everything that we measure and care about in our schools are directly correlated with strong positive teacher-student relationships. These include higher academic engagement, better attendance, improved grades, fewer disruptive behaviors and suspensions, and lower dropout rates. And so it's clear relationships impact is very clear on students especially, but it's also impacting teachers. It's very important as well that we think about the impact that it's having on our staff. You know, a study in the European Journal of Psychology of Education found that teachers' relationship with students was the best predictor of how much the teacher experienced joy versus anxiety in class. And I think we all recognize, I mean, we work all over the country. Everywhere I go and train, I hear over and over that there is a shortage of teachers. Most states are making adjustments to the requirements for becoming an educator just because it is so difficult to keep our teachers and keep our staff invested. And I think a lot of people have struggled because of the behavioral challenges, the mental health issues that our students are experiencing and how it's impacting their behavior in class, that it's making it so that we're seeing teachers just burn out and they're not getting the fulfillment that they had, or they're not seeing the things that got them into education in the first place. And so, you know, our experience with the relationship component is part of what we focus on in training. It's a big portion of the WhyTry program. We work very closely with Tulare County Office of Ed there in California. And they've been working with and supporting the districts that they support in their county in delivering WhyTry in a lot of different settings. Renee Solis is, one of our, we call him a WhyTry warrior. He's one that has been using WhyTry and helping support staff in using WhyTry. And, he was sharing with us just recently, he said, having one trusted adult in the student's life can make all the difference. WhyTry helps educators be that person while giving students the tools they need to succeed, not just in school, but for life. In our juvenile detention and court schools where attendance is mandatory, WhyTry becomes one of the few programs students actively want to attend. They connect with the lessons because it's about their choices and their futures. He was saying by the third or fourth lesson, you see a shift in students start showing up differently, both physically and mentally. They put on a WhyTry hat because it's something special they don't want to miss. And so he's like, I love seeing it. I see the repetition. And when we first start working with kids over a period of time, you start seeing the shift take place where they start engaging. And it first begins with that relationship that we create for them, and then helping them see the connection between that and the relevance of the things we're teaching them. And so, if kids can't see how their choices today are having an impact on their future, they're probably not going to be able to answer the question, why try? And, I think for us in education, it's very understandable that, we're judged based on how our students perform on a test, and they're judged based on how they perform on tests. So often that's what we focus on, the what. What do you need to know to pass this test? And I think we can all relate to what this principal is saying here. Sometimes we focus so much on helping students pass a test, what you need to know, that we fail to help them see how this subject relates to life, the why. It's one of the reasons why we call our program WhyTry, is we're trying to help them see the why of education, not just what you need to know, but why this information, why all these academic subjects are important to me today and in my future. Renee was saying this as well. WhyTry does the heavy lifting. You don't need to be a superstar teacher. Just ask the right questions and let the metaphors work. For attendance, that means less lecturing about showing up and more showing them why it matters. Ashley Wright, she's one of our favorite users of WhyTry. She is the Texas School Counselor of the Year, Elementary School Counselor of the Year. She was one of the finalists for the National School Counselor of the Year, and she's been a huge advocate and user of WhyTry. She said, I've seen students go from constant discipline referrals to advocating for themselves just by connecting their choices to consequences through WhyTry. So making that relevance connection, helping them see the why. So relationships, that is the key to motivation. Relevance is the key to why. Those two R's help plant the seeds for the third R, which is really our end focus, right? Resilience. Um, this is a quote by Quincy Nate, who is the superintendent in Chinle, Arizona, which is just an amazing community that deals with so many difficult challenges on the Navajo Nation. We have done repeated support and work there among their staff and their population that they're serving. And he was named the superintendent of the year for the state of Arizona and was one of the national finalists as well. And we've just seen amazing things that they've been able to do, and we've been really happy to be a part of that work that they do. Here he's saying, if you want a program that works for students facing poverty, trauma, and systemic barriers, WhyTry doesn't just teach resilience; it builds it into the culture of your school. And that's what we really kind of wanted to talk about a little bit. How can we help develop a culture of resilience and a culture of caring? I don't know if you've ever wondered why I teach. Most of my experience teaching WhyTry is in a high school setting, teaching classes with the lowest performing kids. They'll put together the students that are struggling, have the worst attendance, worst GPA. They're the least engaged, and we get to work with this whole group of kids for a semester, teaching them WhyTry. And it's been amazing. Usually their attendance is so low at the beginning, and by the end, the work that we've done to establish a relationship with them, help them see those connections to life and the things that we're teaching them and why these are so important, then it all of a sudden becomes something that they not only recognize how we care about them, how we feel about them, but they start connecting the principles and concepts, and then they start showing up. And by the end, we always have very high attendance. It's usually 80 to 90% attendance when prior to that, it was 30 to 40% lucky to get 30 to 40% of those kids to show up. And it takes a little while. It's not like a magic wand. It's not like some magic solution to a problem. It takes real effort and energy, but that's what we love, is that we're kind of putting it into a model that if I can do it, anyone can do it. I always look at myself often as the lowest common denominator. If I can do this, I'm confident I can get just about anyone out there to do it. Christian is a natural at this. Bruce is a natural at this. I do not do this naturally. I have to be very intentional in my approach. And, when it comes to resilience, I see this all the time with the students I work with. Have you ever wondered why you'll see a student that is struggling? They're shutting down, they're taking their challenges and they're giving up, and they're sometimes hurting themselves and hurting those around them. When I see those students that I'm working with and I get to know them and I find out what's going on at home, what's going on in different areas, I'm not surprised that they're struggling. It's not a mystery. But what always amazes me is I'll see other students that, in spite of his or her challenges, they continue to work and try to be better each day. And they live in the same neighborhood. They go to the same school. They have very similar problems. Sometimes they're even in the same family. Christian mentioned in his family, he has siblings that were incarcerated and that have struggled with substance addiction and a lot of things that he miraculously was able to escape. And, what is the difference between Christian and his siblings? What's the difference between some of the kids we work with and others in the same circumstances that shut down, where they not only cope, they find an ability to thrive? And you have to kind of ask yourself, what is the difference? One student seems to have resilience in moments when the other one doesn't. And I think the important question we always ask is that something you're just born with, or is it something that you can teach? And, I think it's a little bit of both, right? Clearly, personality traits and things that we're born with will impact our ability to be resilient. In my own children, I'll see one that will be more resilient than another in certain moments because of their personality. But in 2025, we're not confused. We know resilience is something that can be fostered. Each student that we work with has the ability to be resilient within them. And so that is always the thing that we're trying to focus on and work on. So that is the heart of what we do in WhyTry. It's relationships, key to motivation, relevance, the key to why, and resilience is our end goal, our focus. And so teaching all those skills are helping teach the skills of resilience, where we put the kids into that position where they're on top of the wall and they have a vision of where they're going. We haven't taken away their problems, but they have a vision of where they're going. And so their ability to deal with their problems improves, and their resilience increases. So WhyTry is typically used in a tier 2 and tier 3 setting. You know, we do have our pre-K and elementary grade level banded lessons. And I think in an elementary setting, it's more natural for teachers that are with students in a self-contained classroom to be teaching lots of different subjects. And so having them get trained in WhyTry and delivering it as kind of a social and emotional, a resilience focused approach is something that often happens. It's delivered at a tier 1 level as well in an elementary setting. But typically when we get into middle school and high school, it's a lot harder, you know, to be focusing on staff they're specialists in different subjects, and they're all overwhelmed with a lot of different things that they're doing and dealing with behavioral problems and dealing with things like chronic absenteeism. And so typically WhyTry is used by your school support staff in a tier 2 small group setting and a tier 3 individual one-on-one approach. In a tier 1 setting in secondary and in elementary, we have for years been doing these workshops on this concept of surrendering the one-up relationship. And I wanted to have just Christian just give a teeny background on where this term comes from and kind of, you know, what it means. Do you want to share that with them, Christian?
Yeah. When I would ask students, what's the answer to the question, why try? And they're like, I don't know, Mr. Moore, they were disengaged. I was like, man, there's got to be some other ways to connect with these kids and in a more deeper way. And I noticed almost every child I was working with, they would see the judge up here, they're down here, the probation officer, the teacher, the vice principal. Everybody's up here. Not that that's reality, that's their perspective. So, they're one down in the relationship. Everybody else is one up. So I started thinking, man, what if we could create an environment where we really surrender that one-up relationship and where the child knows they're winning in the relationship? Because, I'm an adult, I'm an LCSW, I don't have to win in a relationship with a child, and they're more likely to be motivated if I'm not winning in the relationship. But you really have to check your ego. So what I started to do is I had 2 chairs in my office. I had a beautiful leather chair and I had a metal folding chair. So I remember one of the first kids I worked with, this kid had brought a knife to school, a gun to school. I had to write a letter to the attorney general saying it's safe for this kid to go back to school. I'm like, man, I got to come up with something. So I would, and this was a part of a lot of interventions, but this is, if you said to me what really made the difference in this kid's life, I would say it's surrendering the one up. What I did is I would tell the child, pick a chair, either chair. Well, they would head right to the metal folding chair that I spray painted it. I put gum on it. I dented it up. It's this nasty chair. And I even kicked out one of the legs so it was just kind of this awkward chair. And after a couple minutes, I would say to the child, hey, I would say, look, you sit in a nice leather chair. They'd sit in that leather chair, and I would sit on the metal folding chair. And they would love the leather chair. They'd spin around in it, have a little party. But again, after a few minutes, they knew I was the LCSW. I was the expert. I write the letter to the judge or the probation officer or to even the attorney general. So they would go, here, Mr. Moore, here's your chair back, because they know I'm the LCSW. I should be in the nice leather chair. And this is where the magic happened. I'd say, no, you lived your life for the past 12, 13, 14, 15 years. You stay in the nice leather chair. Because when I asked that student to go back to class, turn in their homework, stay in school, make better decisions, it was because of that relationship, the ability to surrender the one up. It's interesting. I get pictures all the time. And even the last 2 weeks, I got 2 or 3 friends that are at conferences all across the country, and speakers now all across America teach surrendering the one up. I think it's even in college textbooks now. It's kind of
They're
blown
stealing
out.
your thunder, man.
Yeah, I know. It's good though, man. It's good. Everybody's surrendering one up. When I was helping teach a class one time, I asked the teacher, I said, let's polka dot the door frame, candy stripe the door frame. And I said, when the kids walk in, let's tell them that they're in a magic classroom, because they'll look at the weird artwork on the door frame. And I'd say, hey, you're in a magic classroom. You come into my classroom, I'm only going to focus on what's right with you. You can go talk to someone else about what's wrong with you. There's no shortage of people that will focus on your deficit. But when you're with me, I'm only going to focus on what you're doing right. And all we're going to focus on is how can you do more of that? And kids love to be in an environment. Students love an environment where they know the adult will just surrender that one up and focus on what's right with them. One last story I'll share, Hans, and pass back over to you is oftentimes when kids would come in, I would tell the teachers, and this is all over YouTube now, but I tell the teachers to do a handshake with the kids, 3 high 5s, 2 low 5s. But I would tell the teacher, mess up, don't do the handshake correctly. And what's cool about that is before the kids even walk into the classroom, the student is teaching the teacher. They'll say, "Hey, remember with me, Mrs. Jones, you do 2 elbow bumps, then the high 5." And so the kid is teaching the teacher before they walk into that classroom. And so you can see now we have over 100 ways to surrender. There might have more. Hans will tell you more about it, but we have many, many ways on how to surrender the one-up relationship. So in WhyTry, you have these 3 R's. The first R is that relationship. We want to make sure we surrendered the one-up. We want that relevancy. Is the intervention relevant to this child? And that's why we do everything multimedia and in an engaging way. And then that third R is resilience. And I'll turn it back over to Hans.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I loved it when Christian was telling me about this, and we kind of, for lack of a better term, we just started calling it surrendering the one-up relationship, because he's like, they're one down and everybody else is one up. And his chair, he called it the expert's chair, because he said, look, you're the expert. We're talking about you. Nobody knows more about you than you do. So you sit in the expert's chair. And, in kind of at the core of it, surrendering the one up is just making them feel valued and feel seen and feel like you like them, that you care about them. On the reality ride, that roller coaster picture, we have a question that we ask where we say, what are some of the challenges kids have at home, at school, and with peers? And whenever I ask the question to my students, what are some of the challenges that kids have at school? Without failure, every time the number one answer I get is, my teachers don't like me. And I often have shared that in training with educators around the country. I said, is that true? Do we really not like our students? And some people go, no, well, maybe, like I think we wonder about some teachers that we've probably known in our experience that have made us think, why are they in education? They don't seem to care. But the vast majority, I mean, we've been doing this for close to 25 years now, and I've trained thousands of teachers in all 50 states. I think I have a pretty good perspective on this. I would say the vast majority, high 90 percentile, do like their students. But if that's the number one thing that kids say, that's evidence of a problem that exists. We're not effectively communicating that message. And so we started coming up with, Christian had things that he would do as a counselor in a one-on-one setting. And some of those, like sitting in your chair, isn't really going to work very effectively in a group or classroom setting. And so we started looking at some of the best teachers, the ones that we recognize as the award-winning teachers that win Teacher of the Year in a school, a district, state level, national level. They all have one thing in common. They're very good at communicating that message to their students. Not only that they don't just like them, their students know they love them. And they have this ability to challenge them and push them to do difficult things, and they'll do it because of that relationship. And so we started observing and working with some of those really amazing educators around the country and compiling a list of things that we observed that they would do that would be just little specific practical things that help them to establish that connection and communicate that value to the students. And so we kind of put these together as a toolkit, and we started doing workshops on this. So we would train staff that are going to be delivering WhyTry. Most of your student support staff and mental health staff would be delivering WhyTry, but then sometimes we would come in and do a workshop just for the whole school on the teachers on surrendering the one-up relationship, and leave behind these resources to help them. And it was a really fun workshop because it kind of changed the way they see their students and gave them very specific things to do. But it would leave them motivated for a couple months and then start to fizzle and fade away. And so over the last couple years, since COVID, we really recognized us going in as outsiders and doing these workshops isn't nearly as effective as if it can be driven and continually supported internally by the school leadership, the administration, and the leadership team within the school. And so as WhyTry is a toolkit for working with students, we created another toolkit for school leadership teams and for administrators, all centered around the importance of relationships and establishing those relationships. And we call it the Transformational Leader Toolkit. And it involves this initial training that we do. We'll come in and train the leadership team. So instead of going to the staff and training the whole staff, we'll train the leadership on how to do this first workshop. It's about a 2-hour workshop that kind of introduces the concept of surrendering the one-up relationship. And it is really awesome because I feel like it creates insight and helps the staff see things a little bit differently without making them feel guilty like they're doing a bad job. You know, you need to be better, you're struggling. You know, it doesn't make them feel that way. If anything, it kind of validates sort of what they've been doing as important. And we use, just like everything in WhyTry, we created a visual metaphor for this that we use, kind of centered around just sort of the phenomenon of selfies. You know, people take selfies all the time, and we do some fun things in the workshop to kind of introduce selfies. And we have this understanding that there are times in our day when we're in selfie mode. That's moments when our focus is on ourself, our needs, our feelings, our goals. Maybe we're prepping for a lesson that we're going to deliver, or we're doing some self-care, personal and work related, right? Then there are moments where we're in what we refer to portrait mode. So it's like flipping the camera the other direction on your phone and pointing it at the students, and your focus is not on you, it's on the student that's in front of you. It's you know, kind of being present in the moment when we're working with them, helping them feel valued, building trust with students, and helping students feel accepted, feel seen, right? And so this workshop is awesome. It's fun for us because it creates that insight for your staff, not just about why positive teacher-student relationships are important, but how to create them, because we all talk about it. I don't know anyone that doesn't see the significance of relationships and why they're so important, but rarely do we hear people talking about how to do it. And I think that's one of the things I've always loved about doing those workshops is we show them how. We give them very specific practical things. And so we have this toolkit that has these resources for this first workshop. And then following up to that, we have additional workshops that are pre-built, ready to go for staff development to continue the conversation and keep things going. And, you know, it's not just one and done professional development. You know, a lot of times you have somebody come in and they present, or you do a workshop, and then that's kind of it. You get people excited, and it doesn't, you know, it lasts for a little while, but it doesn't have that staying power that's really going to create the shift that we need to see to address the root issues of attendance and the root issues of what's causing our chronic absenteeism epidemic. And so the follow-up workshops that we have include, we have 3 different workshops that are kind of a follow-up to that first one, introducing the concept of strengthening the one up and the strategies that we're giving them, and just going deeper. So strengthening the one up, training follow-up, digging deeper, and then even more strategies for strengthening the one up. Then we have a couple of workshops on understanding a trauma-informed approach. We have a workshop on improving relationships through self-awareness, a workshop on celebrating success and how that's key to engagement and motivation, and then on a concept that we call resilient listening. And so these are all kind of designed to be used in PLCs, in staff meetings. They can be in small groups. They could be with your whole staff all together. And, you know, it's probably a couple-year rollout. Maybe it's something you're doing once a quarter, or, you know, every other month, where you're coming back and you're focusing on these concepts to help drive a cultural shift in what we're doing. And so this kind of becomes our tier 1 approach. And what's great is it's not a program that staff have to learn how to teach. You're not adding anything to their plate of responsibilities that they have. You know, they're already overwhelmed. They're already dealing with behavioral issues and dealing with poor attendance and dealing with increasing sizes of classrooms because of the shrinking number of staff that we have. And so we're not adding to their responsibilities. We're just creating something that they can take and deliver, you know, just in a very easy way, incorporated into what they're already doing just on a daily basis. It's just specific strategies that help with their interactions with the students that they're working with. And so when we focus on positive teacher-student relationships, what's the ultimate impact? You know, if this is really driving at the heart of attendance, it's a long-term approach in changing school culture. It has the potential to reduce staff turnover and improve job satisfaction. And it's the most effective way, in our opinion, to improve attendance, student engagement, and reduce chronic absenteeism. So, you know, ultimately, coming back to our metaphor here of the wall, as it relates to chronic absenteeism. You know, this kid standing on top of the wall, the difference between being here with the limited view and here having the big view really is perspective, right? When you can see, you have a vision of where you're going. You know, this kid, if you ask them where you see yourself in 5 years, they don't think 5 days. They just have this very limited view. And they're just struggling with the day-to-day challenges that they're experiencing in their environment, and there's no hope. It's really hard to have hope when you have a limited view because all you can see are their problems. It's metaphorically like you're staring at a brick wall. But being on top of the wall, having the big view, it helps you see the things right here that Christian talked about in his answer to the question, why try? Opportunity, freedom, and self-respect. It helps you see what you have that you're shooting towards, and you have goals, you have dreams, and you see the problems. They're still there. We didn't take them out of their environment. Just like Christian saying to me, I can't get rid of their problems. I can't solve this. Understood. We're not going to be able to take away the problems. So if we can focus on first creating relationships that motivate them, help them see the relevance, to see the why of all this stuff, putting them into that position on top of the wall where they have the ability to see a vision of their future and their perspective of those problems they're dealing with, they see them as temporary and their ability to deal with them increases. And that is resilience. I don't know if there's a time ever in our history where focusing on resilience and on these 3 R's is more important than it is right now with the students that we're working with. And so we're so grateful that you guys are educators, that you chose to do the work that you do, and that the impact that you have as you focus on these issues is so great. And we just want to try and be a resource for you all in any way that we can in the work that we're doing. And so I want to just leave you with something here. I have a summary of all the info that we've shared here, including some resources showing how WhyTry aligns with some of the SARB standards there in California. You know, just all these things that we've shared with you here in this presentation today. So if you can point your phone at that QR code and go there, it'll just capture your information real quickly, and then it's going to send you to a page with just these free resources on resilience. We have our Resilient Educator webinar series. So we just did one last week. We've got another couple ones coming up. They're amazing. We started those back when COVID hit, and we've been having a huge response of educators from all over the country tuning in. And this is more about WhyTry today. Those are usually about topical things that are challenges we're all facing, and they're opportunities for education experts from around the country to be able to share their insights, their strategies, the things that are, you know, practical, useful things that we can all put into practice and apply. And so we've loved those. It's a free resource that anybody can tune into and join the conversation. And then we have our Resilient Educator podcast. So taking those webinars, we take those and then convert them into a podcast form, so that if you're just driving in your car and you want to listen to the discussion that was had, you can tune into it in a podcast form and listen to it. They're kind of about an hour long, so they're sort of that perfect, I think, podcast framework for us. And then we have a resource for parents that goes along with our other program and our book, The Resilience Breakthrough. Our other program we have that's like WhyTry is called Resilience for Youth, and it's based on our theory of resilience in the Resilience Breakthrough, the 4 sources of resilience. And so if you're wondering what's the difference between WhyTry and Resilience for Youth, WhyTry teaches the skills of resilience. Resilience for Youth focuses on the sources of resilience. And both of them have the same end goal of building resilience in our students. They're just coming at them from 2 different directions. And so we have a parent guide that's a free resource that's a companion to that, but it's also just something that can be used in any way to help parents working with their own children and trying to establish a more resilient home environment. And then also just wanted to leave you with a free WhyTry lesson plan if you've never tried that, on the Reality Ride, sharing with you kind of the most commonly used resource. So just as a thank you for coming today, we wanted to leave you with some free things that you can kind of take away. If you're interested in learning more about the Transformational Leader Toolkit or the WhyTry program or Resilience for Youth, anything that we have, we'll respond to you. And in that form, there's a place where you can indicate your interest. If you're interested in scheduling a demo with our program directors, They can answer your questions. They can get together a quote for you, show you how things can be implemented. Their first priority will be trying to understand and discover what challenges and issues you're trying to address, and then seeing how what we have could be a resource for you.
Hey, Hans, I'll
So,
tell you what.
so
Hey,
yeah,
Hans,
I know what Christian's going to do. He's going to
yeah,
give something away. Dang
I
it!
don't do it every time. I don't do it every time, but I'm liking this group. So I miss California. So how about this? I'll give you all a free digital copy of the Resilience Breakthrough of my book if you set up a demo. And the
And
demo are really good demos.
by the way, if you get the digital copy, you also get the audio version. So if you like to listen to it,
Oh,
like
okay.
that's good.
Yep. The audio and the digital. So I'll throw that in if you set up a demo. And I thank you guys for being educators right now. No more important time than to be an educator and to reach these kids. One thing I always tell people, and being someone with severe learning disabilities, I've read now hundreds of books. I spent 8 years in college. The one thing nobody can take from me is my knowledge, is my education. And so that's why it's the most important work on the planet that you guys are doing. So you guys are all my heroes. Thank you. Thank you.